All right, so the intention is to keep us informed throughout this pandemic and to leave this webinar creating an action plan and always updating your action plan. Now, I got asked a lot about people who refuse to abide by the lockdown restrictions when they were ordered by the government or refused to wear a mask. And so one of the things they did, and this was a study in Britain, was they actually looked at people who sort of ignore the restrictions, and they fell into, there was a high percentage of them, not all of them, so I don't want people to say, you know, everyone is this, but a high percentage of them, higher than normal, were in what we call the dark triad, which are narcissistic folks, which have an inflated sense of self-importance, an excessive need of attention, and usually need admiration and have a lack of empathy. Machiavellianism, which is their focus completely on their own interest. If you think about the end justifies the means. Or some degree of psychopathy, which is sort of not able to have empathy, not able to show remorse, kind of really spontaneous, disinhibited sort of reactions. So, you know, it's kind of interesting as it's kind of interesting when you look at this and you look at particularly those folks that have been adamant about not wearing masks, like our president, how they sort of fit into this. All right, to wear a mask or not wear a mask, this actually shows if the person who is COVID positive on the left and then the person is a healthy person on the right. Now, in real life, you don't actually know who's who unless you actually had a COVID test that day. But if the person who's COVID positive does not have a mask and the healthy person has on a mask, there's a 70% chance of transmission. With the COVID positive person having on a mask and the healthy person not having on a mask, there's a 5% probability. And if both people have on a mask, then the percentage of probability goes down to 1.5%. And this is with a basic surgical mask. This is not with a N95 or an N100 respirator mask. So these basic surgical masks that you see people using are about 60% effective. So this is what the transmission rate looks like if one person or the other person or both people. When we actually have 60% of the population wearing a mask 60% of the time, that's 60% effective, then you get to a transmission rate of less than 1. All right, and then this is what the Spirion half respirator mask looks like. That is the N100 mask. So that is the one where you just pop those little clear vents off, and then what you'll actually see is the round purple piece, and you just put your hand over that on both sides at the same time and see if you can breathe, and you should not be able to breathe. And you'll quickly take your hands off, and that means you kind of have the right size and you have it placed right on your face. The N95, so that Spirion half respirator mask blocks out 100% of the particles. Then the N95, KN95 mask, when they're fit tested, they block out 95%. So if you haven't had one professionally fit tested, they might be 85, 90%, but they're still better than the cloth mask. If you actually just sew a face mask, it's important that it be 3 layers. You can have an additional coffee filter. You want it to fit snug around your nose and chin, and you want to be able to easily pull it away without touching the outside of the mask and be able to use it wash it after each use. All right, so now I am going to actually skip these 2 simulations and I'm going to go to the airline simulation, because I did, and I don't know if anybody joined us, but I did have somebody who wanted to join us with the airline simulation and see that. And so I'm going to actually play that one, and then we'll go to the newer slides. Okay, so this basically shows what happens in an airline situation. This actually assumes that there's one person sort of in the middle of the plane in purple that is COVID-19 positive, and it simulates the recirculation and the filtration on a plane. And then it actually shows you, based upon where that person is sitting, which are the people that actually end up infected. So as you can see, that one person infects about 10 people on a plane. Now that's, you know, for a plane that is, you know, not a normal jumbo size plane. All right. So now let's talk about the vaccine. Okay. So this is the vaccine process from beginning to end. So at the beginning, you have an exploratory phase. An exploratory phase is really to look at what sort of infection is this? Where is it attaching? What are the things that upregulate or downregulate the this infectious molecule? What are there any what is it using to get into the cells? What specifically is it using to get into the cells? So that's where you kind of look at, okay, how would we, the exploratory phase is how would we actually disarm this particular virus? Then the preclinical phase is where you take whatever you think it is, a protein or something, and you test it on animals. So there's a phase in which you actually go through only testing it on animals. Then you go into what they call the clinical development phase. So phase one is given to a small group of people. The goal is not to know if it's effective. The goal is just to know if it's safe. And there may or may not be an immune response. Phase two is you give it to a larger group of people, often hundreds, and that's a randomized trial to actually really look at safety, but it's usually a couple of hundred people. Phase three is a larger study. In that study, you're doing thousands or tens of thousands of people, again, to look at the safety and how well it works. So phase 2 and 3 are where you're actually really looking at how much protection does this vaccine give us. Phase 1 is really just, want to make sure the vaccine doesn't do any harm. So let's say you have everything come out of those 3 phases. Then you go into like a regulatory review and approval phase. So that's where you get sort of FDA approval, right? Once you have FDA approval, then you go into manufacturing. With manufacturing, you have to look at quality control. Did that vaccine come off the line, and was it actually what we specified it to be? And then once you have good quality control, then you actually get into distribution. So couple of things with coronavirus, what happened was we had already done the exploratory phase and the preclinical phase with SARS. And SARS is a coronavirus and COVID-19 is a coronavirus. So because of that, we had a jump start. And that is why we're getting a vaccine faster. Now, I know a lot of people think this is not very fast, but we are actually getting a vaccine faster. But I wanted sort of people to see the entire process. Now, when you look at regulatory review and approval, some things can get approval and then that approval can be taken away. So hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine were approved, and now the approval has been actually withdrawn. So, you know, this can be a very fluid process. So where are the vaccines and what type of vaccines are they? So up in the top right-hand corner kind of tells you the type of vaccines that we're dealing with. Some of them are live virus that have been attenuated. Some of them are inactive virus. Some of them look at, they're non-replicating. Some of them are virus-like particles. Some of them are RNA, DNA, etc. Right? So if you look, we have most of the projects right now are in the exploratory phase, right? We have, and each bar actually tells you how many vaccines we have in that, right? So we have about, I say 14, about 20 in the preclinical phase. And then in the phase 1, you've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you've got about a total of 80 vaccines or so that are in various stages of the pipeline. Okay, all right. This actually takes a look at just some of them. The one Moderna, that's the one that you see Fauci actually talking about a lot. That's the one that he's involved in. CanSino is a trial going on in China. That's a Chinese company. And you'll see, and this Shenzhen is also one of the Chinese pharmaceutical companies. So these are just kind of the type of candidates that we're actually seeing. So what's happening specifically with Moderna? That is confirmed to actually start trial phase 3, which is the last phase of the clinical trial. And what they're going to do is they've got to recruit 30,000 volunteers for this particular vaccine. And so that's basically what they're doing starting in July. So to date, they've already enrolled 300 healthy adults. So in July, they'll start doing phase 3. And that will then be once it actually, so we'll probably come out of phase 3 sometime around, I'd probably say if they start in July, they'll probably come out of phase 3 sometime in October, November, December, maybe the beginning of the year. And we'll be looking at a vaccine sometime in the middle of next year or the beginning of next year. All right, then a couple of other things that have come up is that steroid use has decreased the death rate for hospitalized patients by 35%. And so this actually may be something that will really help with those that are the sickest of the COVID-19 patients. There was also we looked at young people, and we sort of have a cutoff now, which is 20 years old. And basically that people estimate that clinical symptoms of COVID-19 manifest in only 21% of those that are 10 to 19, whereas it can arise in 69% of those that are 70 and over. Now that's 21% and 69% of those people that are positive. So, you know, of the folks that are COVID positive, only 20 or 21% of the young people exhibit symptoms, whereas 69% of the older people exhibit symptoms, right? Now, one of the things that is a concern is those 80% of 10 to 19-year-olds that are COVID positive with no symptoms that are then giving it to other people. All righty. So I am going to, with that, turn it over to some Q&A. That is where we are with the vaccine. So it's kind of exciting. I'm glad to actually see that there's a lot of things in the pipeline. Like I said, 80 is really, 80 vaccine options in the pipeline is really good. I mean, that gives a likelihood of us having 2 or 3 that work pretty high. All right, what questions do you guys have out there? And you can either unmute yourself. I think everybody can unmute themselves. We have a small group tonight, so everybody can unmute themselves. Priscilla, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a nerd question.
Yeah.
My nerd question is about the recombinant DNA, I believe it was called. It seemed to be prevalent in the preclinical trials and also in the I guess the pre-clinical trials. Why is that?
Yeah, because the vaccine that they set up with SARS was an RNA, not a recombinant DNA vaccine. So that's because of the SARS vaccine. So what they had done was they had started actually looking at coming out with a SARS vaccine. And then SARS just kind of literally just went poof, right? And so all of that research sort of stopped when the disease really didn't have the, wasn't as communicable as we thought it was going to be, or as contagious as we thought it was going to be. So all of those were RNA or DNA. None of them were recombinant. So all the recombinant DNA vaccines are actually new. So they had to go through the animal testing where the SARS vaccines did not. So they kind of started at a higher level.
Okay, so did I have that right then, that it was recombinant DNA was prevalent more so than any other test?
You mean as far as let me take a look. You mean as far as the number of vaccines?
The number.
Yeah, hold on a second.
I
The
think it was like 22, 6, and then something else in that graph.
yeah, 22 was unknown. So, but the recombinant protein was 9 and 7. No, it was pretty much they were big categories in the exploratory and also preclinical.
And so mhm.
They're a big category.
Yeah, okay. So all right, and you're explaining that they are a big category because we already had a start on them with SARS?
No, we already had a start on the non-replicating viral vector. So everything that is in phase 1, all of the studies, right, all of the vaccines that are in phase 1 and phase 2, you couldn't get into phase 1 and phase 2 this quickly if you had to do animal testing. Mm-hmm. So when we started in, let me get this broadcast thing off. Hold on just a second. Okay. So when they got the genome sequence for COVID-19, the middle of January. That's when China turned it over to the World Health Organization. I think it was January 7th or so, right? So once they got that, if they had to start with animal testing, they wouldn't even be in phase 1 right now, right? So that's why a lot of those are preclinical. So the ones that you see that are in stage 1, 2, and 3, that's because they had already done animal testing with SARS, and they were the same vaccine as SARS. They just made minor adjustments.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. I have a question in the Q&A. Once an individual tests positive, can they test positive again? Also, how long will they test positive for? Good question. All right. So once you actually test positive with COVID, and then you actually become negative, and it's determined that you're negative if you have 2 back-to-back COVID negative tests. That's the determination that you're actually negative and you have no symptoms, right? So then you can catch the disease again. You will usually have milder symptoms. So, but people in China, they have reported people becoming COVID positive again twice. How long will you test positive for? We're not exactly sure because our testing is not really good. And we know that people can be positive and not really have symptoms for up to 14 days. And during that time period, they can be spreading the virus. And then we also have noticed that when their symptoms are over, they can still be positive for a little while as well. So usually if someone's been positive, then what we do is we COVID test them. We make sure they have two negative COVID tests before we declare them as COVID negative. Same thing if someone goes to, if someone's going to go get elective surgery, they do 2 COVID tests on them, and their COVID, both tests have to be COVID negative before they'll actually do an elective surgery on them. All right. Any other question? You can just, if you have a question, you can put it in chat or come on off of mute and speak on up. One thing that I did notice today was we had the highest daily record in Texas, Arizona, and Florida. All 3 states reported for the first time over 2,000 cases in one day. So I think those 3 states are beginning to really see the impact of opening early and not having as many restrictions.
Do you follow, Dr. V, there's a website that lists the R number? Do you follow that? Oh, okay.
Yes, I do. I don't follow it like daily, but I kind of go and take a look. Yes. So the goal is to get your R naught number less than 1, right? And if you look at it, like the southern states are not less than 1. I mean, some places are less than 1. Particularly some of the Northeast. What is California, Priscilla?
let's see. I think I'm on mute. Oh no, I'm not mute. We are hovering right around 1.
Hovering right around 1.
I'm checking the site right now to see where we
Okay.
are. But that
So
was
what
like
that
a month ago.
so what that R naught number means is that one person only gives a disease to one person. If your R naught number is 3, then one person gives the disease to 3 people. So when this was really rampant and we were going around and doing our thing, one person could give this to easily 100 folks, right? So the R naught number can be very, very high, right? Particularly with a disease that's this contagious. So the goal is to get the R naught number less than 1, and then once you get the R naught number less than 1, then you're in a declining status. And that's what I thought. I thought California was still a little bit above 1 because they're still showing as infections growing and not decreasing.
So
but they're close.
I just checked. You're right. We're at 0.98, and I just put the link in the chat.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. So that means one person right now is basically giving it to one person. So yeah, they've got to stay. So that tells you got to stay on lockdown. So for instance, Arizona, Florida, Texas, Alabama, all of these states opened up when their R naught number was 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Their R naught numbers were really high for them to be opening. So the goal is you should really be relaxing the restrictions when the R naught number is less than 1. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really important number to follow, from a public health standpoint, to kind of decide what everybody should be doing. All righty. Any other questions? All right. One thing that I'm working on for Thursday, and it's either going to be Thursday or Tuesday, I'm going to see. I'm actually, we've got a contract tracer that I'm going to be able to interview and talk about what she does as a contract tracer, and actually how she's actually doing her work. So I am in communication with her to get her schedule set so I can see what works for her. And then you'll see on the invite that will actually say interview with contract tracer. Because a lot of people have asked me, well, what do they do? How do they do it? What difference does it make? So I figured let's interview one, and then she can tell us from her own experience what she's actually been doing. She's got trained for the job and has been working it now for about 90 days. All righty. Any other questions before I go? And Holly Weeks, thank you. Priscilla, you came off mute. You've got something?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you. I feel so empowered and way smarter than my friends because you do these every week. They look at me like, what? You know how to do that?
Well, that's my goal, is that you guys are Dr. V, because I can't be everywhere.
Well, I love it because I had a get together at my house. And, it was like the social distancing thing. And it was with one person who's immunocompromised. Okay. And he was super, super scared of everything. And so they brought their own dishes and and we used chopsticks to pick things up. And, so it was, it was great. And I had just got my results back that I'm COVID negative for, the antibodies and for like actually having it. So okay. I knew I wasn't giving it to anybody. Again, 15% margin of error. But if somebody had it, then, I don't know.
Right.
We all wore masks, but so
well, yeah. I was gonna say I did the same thing. We did a socially distancing cookout in one of my friends who has a big backyard. So we got around a table. The table was huge. You know what I mean? And we sort of did a socially distancing cookout, and it was actually good. And we blew a little fan. The other thing that helps is any sort of fan that you could put on that blows the air a little bit.
That's a good idea. Actually, I did this same. I've got a really big backyard, so it was, everybody feels comfortable coming to my house. And I had a fan, so
yeah.
Okay,
there
cool.
You go. Yeah, there you go. Good. Great. All righty. Well, I'm glad you feel empowered. That's the goal of this, is that, see one, do one, teach one. And as we all, we're going to all be in different environments. I was just talking to someone today about flying and what they need to fly with and that sort of thing. and where they can go in the city and get tested before they fly. So that's the goal, is for us all to get empowered. All righty. Well, thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.